I'm Sarah, 32 years old, and for the last 5 years, I've been the sole caregiver for my aging father. Today was his 70th birthday, a milestone I spent weeks planning to make perfect. After everything I'd given up, my career, my life in Chicago, this was supposed to be a moment of family, of celebration. But when the toast began, my brother Kevin stood up, looked right at me in front of everyone, and said, "Pack your bags, loser. This house is going up for sale." The sound of my own family cheering shattered something inside me. In that 1 second, I wasn't his daughter. I was just an obstacle. But they had no idea I wasn't the broke, helpless sister they remembered. As I stepped outside, I made one quick call that was about to burn their entire plan to the ground. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have your back, let me know where you're watching from. And make sure you hit like and subscribe, because you're going to want to see what happens when the loser finally fights back. After leaving for Chicago, I was finally free. For the first time, my success wasn't measured against Kevin's. It was just mine. I threw myself into my work at a fast-growing tech firm. I wasn't just another employee in the marketing department. I became the one they turned to when the stakes were high. While my family back home imagined me in some small cubicle, typing away, the reality was something else entirely. I was leading teams. I was managing budgets that were probably bigger than my brother's entire annual salary. I lived on coffee and ambition, often staying so late that the city lights of downtown Chicago were the only company I kept. My apartment, a place I'd secured all on my own, had this incredible view of Lake Michigan. It was my sanctuary. It was proof that I could build something for myself, away from the shadows of my family. I remember one project in particular, a campaign for a new software launch that everyone thought was impossible. The client was demanding, the timeline was brutal, and the pressure was immense. My boss, a tough but fair guy named Mark, told me it was a long shot. He said, "Sarah, if you can pull this off, it'll be a game changer." That's all I needed to hear. For 3 solid months, my life was that project. I turned down dates, missed parties with friends. I even forgot my own birthday until my phone buzzed with a half-hearted text from my mom. It didn't matter. I was fueled by something they would never understand. The need to prove them wrong. The need to prove to myself that their opinion of me wasn't the truth. The day of the final presentation, I walked into a boardroom filled with stone-faced executives. I could feel their skepticism. I was younger than everyone else in the room by at least a decade. But as I started speaking, laying out the strategy, the data, the creative vision, the atmosphere began to shift. It wasn't just a presentation. It was a performance. By the time I finished, there was a moment of complete silence, followed by applause. We didn't just win the contract. We secured a 5-year, multi-million-dollar partnership for the firm. My family, of course, had no idea. When I tried to tell my dad about it on the phone, he listened for about 30 seconds before interrupting me. He asked if I'd heard that Kevin had just closed a deal to refinance a local car dealership. A car dealership. I remember just holding the phone, listening to him go on and on about how proud he was of Kevin's business sense. The multi-million-dollar partnership I had just secured, it didn't even register. To them, I was still just Sarah, the one who was doing okay in the city. The bonus I received from that campaign was life-changing. It was a number with so many zeros it didn't feel real at first. My first instinct, the one ingrained in me since childhood, was to think about how I could use it to help my family. Maybe pay off some of the debt Kevin was always accumulating. Maybe buy my parents that anniversary trip they never took. But then I stopped. For the first time, I decided to be selfish. I called up my best friend from college, a guy named Ben, who was now a financial advisor. He was the only person outside of work who knew the real numbers, the true scale of my success. When I told him the amount, he just whistled. He said, "Sarah, this isn't just a bonus. This is a launch pad. This is your escape hatch." He was right. We didn't spend it on fancy cars or designer clothes. We invested it, quietly, smartly. We put a significant chunk into a diversified portfolio of tech stocks, the very industry I knew inside and out. Then, we used another portion as a down payment on a small two-bedroom condo in a developing neighborhood. It wasn't for me to live in. It was an income property, a secret asset. My name was on the deed and no one else's. Over the next couple of years, that one bonus snowballed. The stocks grew. The rental income from the condo steadily flowed into a separate account that my family knew nothing about. I was building a fortress of financial independence, brick by silent brick. They still saw me as the daughter who probably struggled with rent, the one who couldn't afford to fly home for every holiday. Kevin would sometimes make condescending comments on the phone, asking if I was managing to save anything, and offering his unsolicited, terrible financial advice. I would just politely thank him and change the subject, letting him believe he was the successful one, the financial genius of the family. Their ignorance was my greatest advantage. It was my secret weapon. They had no idea that while they were busy celebrating small victories, I was quietly building an empire they were about to foolishly declare war on. Everything changed with a single phone call. It was my brother, Kevin. He told me Dad wasn't doing well after Mom passed. He said Dad was forgetting things, that he wasn't eating right. The unspoken message was clear. It was my turn to step up. So I did. I packed a bag, told my boss I needed a leave of absence, and drove the 5 hours back to my childhood home. What was supposed to be a temporary arrangement slowly became my life. I gave up my apartment in Chicago. I resigned from my job. I put my entire future on hold, believing it was what a good daughter should do. And while I was busy changing bandages and managing medications, my family was busy making other plans. The warning signs were there, subtle at first, like static on a radio before a storm. It started with the phone calls from Kevin. They became more frequent, but less personal. He stopped asking how I was doing. Instead, he'd ask these weird, probing questions. Questions like, "Hey, has Dad mentioned updating his will lately?" Or, "Just curious, have you had the house appraised recently? Property values in that neighborhood are insane right now." At the time, I brushed it off as my brother just being his usual money-obsessed self. I didn't see the pieces he was moving on the board. Then there was Linda, the woman my father married just a year after my mom's death. She was a nurse he'd met at the clinic, and at first she seemed like a blessing. But soon, I started noticing things. She had this way of being overly sweet, almost like a character in a movie. She would prepare these special herbal teas for Dad every night, insisting they would help him sleep. But I noticed that on the nights he drank her tea, he would be more confused the next day, more forgetful. His good days started becoming rarer, and his bad days became the new normal. A cold knot of dread began to tighten in my stomach. I felt like I was watching a slow-motion car crash, but I couldn't figure out who was driving. The final warning came a week before Dad's 70th birthday party. I was in the study, looking for an old photo album, when I found a folder tucked away in Dad's desk drawer. It was filled with real estate brochures. Not just any brochures. They were for a place called Oakwood Terraces, a high-end premium senior living facility, the kind of place you move someone into when you're ready to sell their home and cash in. My blood ran cold. My father loved his home. It was his sanctuary, filled with memories of my mother. He would never choose to leave. I knew then, something was terribly wrong. I felt like a fool for not seeing it sooner. This wasn't about my father's health. It was about his assets. Despite the growing sense of doom, I was determined to make my dad's 70th birthday perfect. It felt like the last piece of normal I could give him. I spent 2 weeks cleaning, cooking, and decorating. I baked his favorite cake from my mom's recipe, the one with the handwritten notes in the margins. I invited his oldest friends, people who had known him for decades. I wanted to surround him with genuine love, to create a shield against whatever was coming. The day of the party arrived, and the house filled with fake smiles and hollow laughter. Kevin and his wife arrived, childless, with a gift bag that looked like it was bought at a gas station on the way over. My sister Jessica gave Dad a quick, distracted hug before immediately huddling in a corner with Kevin, their heads bowed together in whispered conversation. Linda floated around the room in an expensive new dress, playing the part of the devoted wife, but I could see the predatory excitement in her eyes. She knew something I didn't. Or rather, she thought I didn't. After we ate, I brought out my gift. I'd saved up for months for this. 2 first-class tickets to Lake Tahoe, a place my parents had always loved. I wanted to give him a chance to revisit those memories, with me by his side. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I know you've always wanted to go back." Before I could finish, Linda let out a short, sharp laugh. It cut through the room like breaking glass. "Oh, Sarah, you're so sentimental," she said, patting my dad's hand condescendingly. "He's in no condition to travel. His heart, his blood pressure. Are you trying to kill him?" The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Then Kevin jumped in, eager to twist the knife. "Seriously, Sarah, let's be realistic," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "This is about Dad's health, not your little trip down memory lane. Have you ever once thought about what's actually best for him? Or is it always about you?" It was a masterclass in manipulation. In 30 seconds, they had taken a heartfelt gift and twisted it into an act of selfish cruelty. They painted me as the reckless, thoughtless daughter in front of everyone I had invited. I could feel my face burning with humiliation. My throat was so tight I couldn't speak. I looked at my dad, hoping he would defend me, but he just looked confused, lost in the fog that Linda's special tea had created. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a calculated public execution, designed to discredit me and pave the way for what came next. And then, it came. Kevin stood up, tapping his glass for attention. The room fell silent. He cleared his throat, a smug, triumphant smile playing on his lips. "I'd like to make a toast," he began, "to Dad. He's given us so much over the years. And today, we're finally giving him something back, a new beginning." He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes locking with mine for a split second. "As some of you know, this house has become too much for him. After careful consideration, and with the authority granted to me by the power of attorney Dad signed last week, we've decided to sell." He let that sink in. I could feel the air leave my lungs. Then, he turned his full attention to me. His voice was cold, dripping with years of resentment and perceived superiority. He looked right through me, as if I were nothing more than a piece of furniture that needed to be moved out of the way. And in front of my father, his friends, and the family that had watched me sacrifice everything, he delivered the final blow. "So, Sarah," he said, his smile never faltering, "pack your bags, loser. This house is going up for sale." A smattering of applause broke out, led by Linda and my sister. They were cheering, actually cheering, as if he had just announced a promotion, not the heartless eviction of his own sister and the betrayal of his father. I looked at Dad, and his face was just a mask of pure, heartbreaking confusion. He didn't understand. In that moment, after 5 years of service, of sacrifice, I was officially homeless, an outcast, a loser. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about the house, it was about erasing me. At this point, I don't even know what word to use for what I'm feeling. If you're as furious as I am right now, help me out and comment one word to describe what this family just did. But instead of breaking down, that rage, that profound sense of injustice, it solidified into something cold and hard in the pit of my stomach, something that felt a lot like power. I didn't storm out. I didn't scream or cry. I simply stood up from the table, placed my napkin down, and walked out the front door into the cool evening air. The sound of their cheerful chatter faded behind me, replaced by the rhythmic chirp of crickets and the frantic beating of my own heart. I leaned against the porch railing, the rough wood digging into my palms, and took a breath. It wasn't shaky. It was steady, cold. In that moment, something inside me shifted, like a tectonic plate grinding into a new, unmovable position. The part of me that had spent a lifetime craving their approval, it just died. It withered and turned to dust. There was no grief for its passing, only a profound, chilling clarity. It was like I had been looking at a blurry picture my whole life, and suddenly, someone had twisted the lens into perfect focus. I saw them for exactly who they were, not as my family, but as adversaries. My brother, the golden child, was a man so hollow inside that he had to tear others down to feel tall. My sister, a weak-willed follower, was content to stand in her brother's shadow as long as it kept her out of the line of fire. And Linda, a predator in sheep's clothing. They weren't just flawed people making mistakes. This was a conspiracy, a coordinated attack, and they had just made the single biggest miscalculation of their lives. They assumed I was still the same little girl who would just absorb the blow and retreat to her room to cry. My mind started working with a speed and precision that surprised even me. The years I had spent managing complex marketing campaigns, juggling dozens of variables, anticipating an opponent's every move, it all came rushing back. But this wasn't about selling software, this was about survival. I replayed the last few months in my head, but this time, with the benefit of hindsight. Kevin's weird questions about the house's value weren't just idle curiosity, they were reconnaissance. Linda's special tea wasn't a folksy remedy, it was a chemical weapon designed to cloud my father's mind and make him more compliant. The brochures for Oakwood Terraces, that was the endgame. It all clicked into place, a disgusting, perfect puzzle of greed and betrayal. A thought echoed in the sudden silence of my mind. It was sharp and clear. Enough. This ends now. There will be no next time. They will never have this power over me again. The pain of their betrayal didn't vanish. Instead, it transmuted. It became fuel. It became a cold, hard resolve that settled deep in my bones. I felt my spine straighten. The humiliation they had tried to heap on me, it slid off me like water off steel. They had intended to break me, but instead, they had just forged me into something new, something they were not prepared to face. I pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I scrolled past my friends' numbers, past the people I would normally call for comfort. Comfort was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. I needed an ally. I needed a weapon. My finger stopped on a name I had added to my contacts 3 weeks ago, right after I'd found those real estate brochures. David Chen, a name given to me by my old mentor Mark, from my firm in Chicago. Mark had described him as a shark, the best damn elder law and estate litigation attorney in the state. At the time, calling him had felt like an act of paranoia. Now, it felt like the sanest thing I had ever done. I had met with David secretly during a trip I'd told my family was for a dentist appointment. I sat in his polished downtown office, a world away from the dusty, memory-filled house I was now fighting for. I laid out my suspicions, the weird phone calls, Linda's behavior, my father's increasing confusion. I felt like I was spinning a wild conspiracy theory. But David didn't laugh. He listened intently, his expression serious. He took notes. He told me that what I was describing was a classic red flag for financial elder abuse. He advised me on what to look for, what to document. He told me to keep a log, to make copies of financial statements, and he gave me a crucial piece of advice. He said, "Sarah, if you suspect they are medicating him, you need proof. The best defense is a proactive offense." Following his advice, I had done something that made me feel sick to my stomach, but I knew it was necessary. I installed a small, discreet nanny cam in the corner of the living room, hidden inside a digital clock. The kind of thing you can buy on Amazon for $50. For 2 weeks, it recorded. And I watched the footage late at night on my laptop, my heart pounding with each clip. I saw Linda crushing small pills into my father's evening tea. I recorded a hushed phone call between her and Kevin where she said, "He's getting more and more confused. The papers are on his desk. He'll sign anything I put in front of him soon." I saw my brother visit one afternoon when he thought I was out, spreading legal documents across the coffee table, pointing to signature lines while Linda nodded eagerly. I saved every second of that footage to a secure cloud server, a digital bombshell waiting to be detonated. Now, standing on the porch, I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring. His voice was calm, professional. "David Chen." "David, it's Sarah," I said, my own voice devoid of emotion. It sounded like a stranger's. "It's happening. Right now. They just announced it." There was a pause on the other end, but not of surprise. It was the pause of a strategist processing new intelligence. "Okay, Sarah," he said, his tone shifting, becoming sharper. "Tell me exactly what was said." I relayed Kevin's words verbatim. The power of attorney, the sale of the house, the name Oakwood Terraces, and the final brutal dismissal. "Pack your bags, loser." "He said that in front of witnesses?" David asked. "Yes, a whole room full of them." "Good," David said, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. That establishes a clear pattern of malicious intent. It's no longer just about money, it's about personal animus. A jury would eat that up, he continued. "I've already prepared the emergency injunction to block any sale or transfer of the property, just as we discussed. It's ready to be filed electronically the second I get off this phone. They can't sell a brick of that house without a court order." I felt a wave of relief, but I knew that was just the first step. That was defense. Now, it was time for offense. "I have the videos, David," I said. "Everything, the medication, the conversations. It's all there." "Excellent," he said. "I'm 10 minutes away. I was hoping you'd call. I have a colleague with me, a geriatric specialist who can perform an on-site cognitive assessment of your father and take a blood sample for a toxicology screen. His testimony, combined with your video evidence, will be irrefutable." 10 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. But I knew what I had to do in the interim. This wasn't just about legal maneuvering. It was about taking back control. I ended the call with David and immediately dialed another number. My financial advisor, Ben. "Ben, it's me," I said, keeping my voice low. "I need you to do something for me, right now. It's time." For the past year, Ben and I had been working on a contingency plan, a financial firewall. We had set up a new trust in my name and had been slowly, legally, and ethically transferring my personal assets, the stocks, the rental income from my condo, my savings, into that trust, making them untouchable in any frivolous civil suit my brother might dream up. The final piece was a large, liquid cash reserve I kept in a high-yield savings account. "Liquidate the emergency fund," I told him, "all of it, and prepare to wire the full amount for the retainer," David Chen and I discussed. "I want him on an exclusive retainer, starting tonight. I want his undivided attention. I don't care what it costs." Ben didn't question it. He just said, "Consider it done. The funds will be ready in minutes. You got this, Sarah." I hung up the phone, a grim sense of satisfaction settling over me. They thought they were taking away my home. They thought they were leaving me with nothing. They had no idea I was about to pay for the best legal team in the state with money they didn't even know I had. They were playing checkers, and I was about to overturn the entire chessboard. The loser was done playing their game. Now, they were going to have to play mine. And I don't lose. I took one last deep breath on the porch, the cool night air feeling like a splash of cold water on my face. Then I turned, opened the front door, and walked back into the lion's den. The scene inside was exactly as I'd imagined. My brother Kevin was the king of his little castle, leaning over the coffee table with a pen in his hand, pointing out sections of a document to a slick-looking man in a cheap suit who I assumed was a real estate agent. Linda was hovering behind my father's chair, her hands placed possessively on his shoulders, whispering sweet nothings into his ear. My sister, Jessica, was standing awkwardly by the fireplace, trying to look supportive, but mostly just looking uncomfortable. They were so absorbed in their victory lap that they didn't even notice me at first. Kevin was the first to look up. He saw me standing there, and a smug, patronizing smile spread across his face. "Oh, you're back," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Finished your little crying session? Good. Ow, if you don't mind, the adults are handling some important business here. Maybe you could go make some coffee for everyone." That was it. That was the moment. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't get angry. I just looked at him, my expression completely flat, and said a single sentence that cut through the celebratory atmosphere like a surgeon's scalpel. "The business," I said calmly, "stops now." Kevin actually laughed. A short, barking laugh of disbelief. "Excuse me? I don't think you're in a position to make demands, little sister. The power of attorney is signed. It's a done deal. Game over." "You're right about one thing," I replied, my voice still level. "It is game over." And right on cue, the front door opened again. But this time, it wasn't just me. First, a man in a sharp, tailored suit stepped in, carrying a leather briefcase. He had an air of quiet, lethal competence about him. David Chen. Behind him was another man, older, with kind eyes and a doctor's bag. And finally, my Uncle Frank, my dad's younger brother, whom I'd also called from the porch. His face was set in a grim, determined line. The air in the room didn't just get quiet. It evaporated. The smug smile on Kevin's face froze, then melted into confusion. Linda's hands tightened on my father's shoulders. The real estate agent looked up from his papers, his eyes darting between the newcomers and me, suddenly realizing he had walked into something far more complicated than a simple property sale. David stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. He didn't introduce himself as my attorney, he introduced himself as my father's. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "My name is David Chen. I am representing Mr. Arthur Vance in all matters concerning his estate and personal welfare." Kevin stammered. "Representing him? I represent him. I have the power of attorney." "About that," David said, opening his briefcase. "We have reason to believe that the document you're referring to was signed under duress and cognitive impairment, potentially induced by unauthorized and unprescribed medication. Therefore, it is legally invalid." Linda gasped, a theatrical, wounded sound. "How dare you? I have done nothing but care for my husband." I decided it was my turn. I took out my phone. I didn't say a word. I just turned the screen towards my sister Jessica, and I pressed play. It was the footage from the nanny cam. The clip was crystal clear. It showed Linda standing in our kitchen just 2 nights ago, crushing a small white pill and stirring the powder into the herbal tea she made for my dad every night. Jessica's face went pale. She looked from the phone to Linda and then to Kevin, her eyes wide with horror. "What is that?" she whispered. "Kevin, what is that?" "It's a sedative, Jessica," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Not prescribed by his doctor. One that, according to medical literature, is known to cause confusion and memory loss in elderly patients." Kevin's face was turning a blotchy red. "This is insane! You've been spying on us? That's illegal." "Actually," David interjected smoothly, "installing a security camera in a common area of one's own home is perfectly legal, especially when there's a reasonable suspicion of elder abuse, which, I believe, is what the district attorney will call this." He let the words district attorney hang in the air for a moment. "And that's before we even get to the financial exploitation." Now Kevin looked truly panicked. "Financial exploitation? What are you talking about?" David pulled a sheaf of papers from his briefcase. Bank statements. "I'm talking about over $50,000 in financial management fees that have been transferred from your father's accounts to a shell corporation registered under your name over the past 18 months. Fees that are roughly 4 times the industry standard. That, Mr. Vance, is not management. That's theft. The room was absolutely silent now, except for the sound of my father's unsteady breathing. He was looking back and forth between all of us, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the old, sharp intelligence in his eyes. The fog was beginning to lift. The real estate agent, realizing he was now a witness to multiple felonies, started frantically gathering his papers. "You know what?" he said. "I think I have the wrong address. I should be going." He practically ran out of the door. Linda, seeing her escape route closing, tried a different tactic. She turned to my father, her face a mask of wounded innocence. "Arthur, darling," she cooed. "They're twisting everything. You know I love you. Tell them. Tell them how well I take care of you." But before my dad could respond, the second man, the doctor, stepped forward. "Mr. Vance," he said gently, "my name is Dr. Evans. I'm a geriatric specialist. With your permission, I'd like to take a quick blood sample. It will help us determine exactly what medications are in your system." "No!" Linda shrieked, her composure finally shattering. "You can't! As his wife, I forbid it." "Fortunately, your consent is not required," David said calmly. He produced another document from his briefcase. "This is a healthcare proxy signed by your father 6 months ago during a period of documented lucidity, naming his brother, Frank, as his sole healthcare decision-maker. It supersedes any authority you or your co-conspirator might claim to have." He handed a copy to Kevin, whose hands were now visibly shaking. And then, as a final nail in the coffin, I turned my phone screen towards Kevin. It wasn't a video this time. It was a chain of text messages I had paid a forensic tech expert to recover from an old phone of my father's. Messages between Kevin and a number I now knew belonged to Linda. Messages that were dated 3 years ago, long before she had ever met my father. One text from Kevin read, "Found a perfect mark. Widower, valuable property. Daughter living with him might be an issue. We'll need to manage her." Linda's reply was chillingly simple. "The daughter can be handled. Just get me an introduction." My sister Jessica read the messages over Kevin's shoulder and let out a choked sob. "Oh my God, Kevin," she cried. "You planned this. All of it." The game was over. The board was cleared. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't needed to. I had simply presented the truth. And the truth was a far more brutal weapon than any angry words could ever be. I just stood there, watching as their carefully constructed world crumbled into dust around them, the silence in the room more damning than any accusation. They had called me a loser. They had no idea they were the ones who had already lost. For a long moment, nobody moved. It was as if I had detonated a bomb that only they could hear, and they were all frozen in the deafening silence of the aftermath. The first to break was Linda. Her mask of wounded innocence didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces, revealing the snarling, desperate creature underneath. "This is slander!" she shrieked, her voice high and shrill. "You can't prove any of this. It's all circumstantial, you little bitch. You've been planning this from the beginning." But her denial was hollow. It was the frantic thrashing of a drowning swimmer. The evidence was right there, glowing on the screen of my phone. My sister, Jessica, stared at the text messages, her face a pale, horrified canvas. She looked at Kevin, her voice barely a whisper. "Kevin, tell me it's not real. Tell me you didn't do this." Kevin, however, was past the point of denial. His mind, always quick with numbers and angles, was rapidly calculating the fallout. The loss of the house was just the beginning. The words David had used: district attorney, financial exploitation, elder abuse. These weren't just legal terms. They were career-ending, life-destroying words, and that's when the panic set in. Pure, unadulterated terror. "This is all your fault!" he suddenly roared, but his voice was shaking. He wasn't pointing at me, he was pointing at Linda. "You were supposed to be careful. You were supposed to handle her." "Me?" Linda screeched back, turning on him. "You're the one who got greedy with the management fees. You're the one who left a paper trail a mile long. I told you she was smarter than she looked." It was incredible to watch. The two masterminds, the united front that had planned my father's demise and my eviction, were now tearing each other apart like cornered rats. But this was just the overture. The real performance began when David, my lawyer, calmly cleared his throat. "While you two decide who to blame," he said, his voice cutting through their argument, "perhaps you should consider the immediate consequences. I'll be filing a report with the state nursing board regarding Ms. Peterson's activities first thing in the morning, and a separate report with the IRS regarding your creative accounting, Mr. Vance." That's when Kevin tried his final, desperate gambit. It was a move so audacious, so vile, that for a second I was almost impressed by its sheer evil. He turned his attention back to me, his face contorted in a mask of righteous fury. "You know what?" he spat. "Fine. You want to play dirty? Let's play dirty. We're going to countersue. We're going to sue you, Sarah, for elder abuse." The accusation was so absurd it took my breath away. "Abuse?" I repeated, the word tasting like poison. "Yes, abuse," he sneered, his confidence growing as he spun his disgusting narrative. "Who's been living here rent-free for 5 years, slowly isolating our father from his family? Who's been in control of his day-to-day finances, his groceries, his bills? We'll hire the best forensic accountant in the state. We will paint a picture for the court of a deadbeat daughter who latched onto her grieving father to secure her inheritance. By the time we're done with you, you'll be the one facing criminal charges. You will be ruined." He was weaponizing my sacrifice. He was taking 5 years of my life, the lost career, the sleepless nights, the endless worry, and twisting it into a crime. It was the most profoundly cruel thing I had ever experienced. The air in the room grew thick with the poison of his words. I saw my Uncle Frank take a protective step towards me. I saw my sister recoil from her own brother as if he were radioactive. But I didn't flinch. I let him finish. I let his threats hang in the air, festering in the silence. Then I watched as David gave a slow, deliberate nod, as if considering the argument. "An interesting, if fictional, legal theory," David said, his voice dangerously calm. "While your accountants are busy scrutinizing 5 years of grocery receipts, perhaps they can also explain the $50,000 transferred from your father's accounts to yours. Because my team has already found it. And unlike your accusations, Mr. Vance, bank transfers don't lie." Checkmate. Kevin's face crumpled. The last of his bluster, his arrogance, his entire sense of superiority. It all just deflated out of him, leaving behind the shell of a weak, terrified man. He had nothing left. No lies, no threats, no escape routes. And that's when my father, who had been sitting silently through all of this, finally spoke. The fog in his mind had completely cleared, replaced by a burning, righteous anger. He stood up, his movements a bit unsteady, but his voice was the strongest I had heard in years. He looked at Linda, the woman who had shared his bed while slowly poisoning his mind. "Get out of my house," he said, each word like a chip of ice. Then he turned to my brother, his own son, the golden child, and the look on my father's face was one of pure, devastating heartbreak. "You," he said, his voice cracking with the weight of the betrayal. "You are no longer my son. Get out, both of you, now." The collapse was immediate and total. Linda began to sob, not with remorse, but with the self-pity of a con artist who had been caught. "Arthur, please," she begged. "Don't do this. They've twisted everything." My father just pointed to the door. Kevin didn't even try to argue. He just grabbed his jacket, his face pale and slack with shock. He wouldn't even look at me. He wouldn't look at our father. He just stumbled towards the door, defeated. Linda, realizing her meal ticket was gone, grabbed her purse and followed him, hurling a final venomous insult over her shoulder. "You'll all regret this," she screamed. "This was all her fault." Then they were gone. The silence they left behind was heavy, filled with the ghosts of what had just happened. My sister Jessica was openly weeping now, covering her face with her hands. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I had no idea. He told me. He told me you were overwhelmed, that Dad needed professional care. I never thought—" I didn't have the energy to comfort her. Not yet. I just felt empty. The adrenaline that had been pumping through my veins for the past hour was gone, leaving behind a deep, profound exhaustion. We had won. I had won. But it felt like a victory in a war that never should have been fought. The next 48 hours were a blur of frantic, desperate attempts at damage control from Kevin. My phone started blowing up. First, it was him, a string of increasingly panicked text messages. "Sarah, we need to talk. This has all been a huge misunderstanding. You're destroying the family. Answer your phone." When I didn't reply, he started calling. I let each call go to voicemail. I listened to one of them. His voice was a pathetic mix of pleading and threats. He offered to reconsider the sale of the house, to work something out, as if it were still his decision to make. When he realized I wasn't going to engage, he sicked our sister on me. Jessica called, crying, telling me that Kevin was a wreck, that his wife was threatening to leave him, that I was being cruel by not talking to him. She said, "Can't you just let it go for the sake of the family?" For the sake of the family. The same family that had cheered when he called me a loser. The same family that was ready to throw me out on the street. I told her, as gently as I could, that the family she was talking about didn't exist anymore. Then I hung up. The final stage was the guilt trip. Voicemails from extended family members, aunts and uncles who had heard Kevin's twisted, self-serving version of the story. They told me I was selfish, that I was tearing everyone apart over a house. They had no idea about the poison, the lies, the theft. They only saw what Kevin wanted them to see. The golden boy, brought low by his ungrateful, vindictive sister. It was a masterclass in manipulation, even in defeat. He was trying to isolate me, to turn everyone against me, to make me the villain in a story where I had been the sole protector. But I wasn't listening anymore. Their voices were just noise now. The only voice that mattered was the one in my own head, the one that kept repeating a single powerful truth. I was free. The apathetic family members kept contacting me, but it was just noise now. Their voices faded into the background, like a TV left on in another room. For the first time, there was a quiet space in my head, a space that used to be filled with a constant, humming anxiety about what they thought of me. And in that quiet, I began to hear my own voice again. It was a little rusty, but it was there, and it was telling me what to do next. My phone buzzed incessantly for days, a constant barrage of texts and missed calls. It felt like they were trying to claw their way back into my life through sheer force of will. Finally, I saw a call coming in from my sister Jessica, and for some reason I answered. Maybe a small part of me still hoped she could understand. Her voice was thick with tears. "Sarah," she sobbed, "you have to stop this. Kevin's life is falling apart. His wife left him. He might lose his job. You're destroying him. You're destroying our family." I listened, but I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anger. I just felt nothing. The emotional hooks they had used to control me my whole life, they just didn't work anymore. "Jessica," I said, and my voice was calm and even. "Kevin destroyed himself. He made his choices. Linda made hers. And you stood by and watched. The family you're talking about, it was built on a foundation of lies and my own silent sacrifice. That family is over." "But what are we supposed to do?" she cried, her voice filled with a helpless panic I recognized all too well. It was the panic of someone who had never had to solve their own problems. And that's when I said the words I had needed to say my entire life. "That's no longer my responsibility." I didn't say it with malice. I said it as a simple statement of fact, like saying the sky is blue. I'm not the family problem solver anymore, I continued. I'm not the emotional punching bag. I am not responsible for Kevin's happiness or your comfort. From now on, I am only responsible for myself and for Dad. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. She didn't know how to respond to this new version of me, the version that didn't immediately rush in to fix everything. I need time, Jessica, I finished. A lot of time. Please don't call me again for a while. And then, I hung up. I went into my contacts and found Kevin's name. I pressed block. I did the same for Linda. It felt like closing a heavy iron door. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't backing down. I was choosing myself over their chaos. This was a huge moment. If you support this powerful decision, drop a flexed bicep emoji in the comments to send some strength her way on this journey. With that door closed, I realized another one had opened, and the people walking through it weren't bound to me by blood. They were bound by respect and genuine care. My Uncle Frank became a rock. He started coming over for dinner 3 times a week. We didn't always talk about what happened. Sometimes we'd just sit on the porch with Dad, watching the sunset. His quiet, steady presence was a healing balm. He saw me not as the responsible one, but just as his niece, Sarah. He saw me. My lawyer, David, also became an unlikely pillar of support. After the legal dust had settled, he called me. Not as a lawyer, but as a person. He said, "I see cases like this all the time, Sarah, but I've rarely seen someone handle it with the kind of strength and preparation you did. You should be incredibly proud of yourself." To hear that from someone who had no emotional stake in the outcome, it meant more than 1,000 empty apologies from my siblings ever could. He recognized my competence, not just my pain. And then, there was a call that truly brought me back to myself. It was from my old boss, Mark, in Chicago. He'd heard a little about what happened through the grapevine. He didn't pry. He just said, "The job's still here for you if you ever want it, Sarah. Or any job you want. You were the best damn marketer I ever had. Don't let those bastards make you forget who you are." That one phone call was like a lifeline, pulling me out of the murky waters of family drama and reminding me that I had built a life, a career, and a reputation entirely on my own merit. A reputation that was waiting for me whenever I was ready to reclaim it. I started to realize that family wasn't a word defined by shared DNA. It was a word defined by shared values, by loyalty, by support. My real family wasn't the one I was born into. It was this small, eclectic group I had gathered around me. A compassionate uncle, a sharp-witted lawyer, a supportive old boss, and my best friend Ben, who had guarded my financial secrets like a dragon guarding gold. These were the people who had my back. This was my chosen family. And with them on my side, I knew I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to build something new from the ashes. Something stronger. Something that was entirely mine. 6 months passed. Not in a blur, but in a series of quiet, deliberate days. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clean, quiet stillness. The first thing to return was the sound of my father's laughter. Free from the chemical fog Linda had kept him in, he came back to us, to me. His mind sharpened, his energy returned, and the weary confusion in his eyes was replaced by that old familiar spark. We established a new routine: morning coffee on the porch, long walks in the afternoon, and chess games in the evening that I usually lost. The house, which had once felt like a battleground, was a sanctuary again. I didn't go back to Chicago, not yet. Instead, I found a remote position as a marketing strategist for a new startup. It was the perfect balance. I could rebuild my career on my own terms, from the quiet of my childhood bedroom, while still being there for my dad. It wasn't the high-powered corner office life I'd once chased, but it was something better. It was peace. It was freedom. The consequences for Kevin and Linda were swift and severe. The toxicology report from Dad's blood sample was the final, irrefutable piece of evidence. Linda, faced with a mountain of proof and the threat of a long prison sentence, took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to felony elder abuse. She lost her nursing license, got a few years of probation, and a permanent restraining order that legally barred her from ever coming within 500 feet of my father or our home. She disappeared from our lives as quickly as she had entered, a bad dream that we were finally waking up from. Kevin's downfall was more complex, and in a way, more complete. The financial fraud investigation was just the beginning. The story of what he'd done spread like wildfire through our small town and his professional circles. His firm fired him, citing a morals clause in his contract. His wife, Megan, who had built her entire identity on being married to a successful CFO, couldn't handle the public humiliation. She packed her bags and took the kids back to her parents' house. The golden boy's perfect world had imploded, leaving him with nothing but the consequences of his own greed. Last I heard, he was living in a small apartment across town, working a low-level accounting job, the ghost of the man he pretended to be. My sister, Jessica, was the only one who tried to bridge the gap. She didn't call with excuses or pleas for forgiveness on Kevin's behalf anymore. Instead, she just started showing up. At first, it was awkward. She'd bring groceries or offer to mow the lawn. She didn't talk about what happened. She just helped. She was building a bridge back to us, not with words, but with actions. It was a slow process, but for the first time, our relationship wasn't being filtered through Kevin's influence. It was just us. We were rebuilding on a new foundation, one of honesty and effort. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Last month, Dad and I finally took that trip to Lake Tahoe. As we stood by the water's edge, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, the same way he had with my mom 45 years ago, the final piece of my own puzzle clicked into place. I had spent so much of my life chasing a version of success and approval that my family had defined. I thought my value was tied to my job title, my salary, or how well I could fix their problems. I was wrong. My value wasn't something they could give me, so it wasn't something they could take away. Standing there, I realized that my real strength wasn't just in the money I had secretly saved. That was a tool. My real strength was in the decision to finally use it for myself. It was in drawing a line in the sand and refusing to let them cross it. It was in the quiet confidence of knowing I had built my own lifeboat, long before I ever saw their storm coming. The greatest lesson I learned is that sometimes the family you're born into is just the starting point. The real family, the one that truly matters, is the one you choose, the one who chooses you back. The people who respect you, support you, and fight for you, not because they have to, but because they want to. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family members who refuse to see your worth? How did you navigate that incredibly difficult conversation? Share your story in the comments below. I think we could all learn from each other. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding your voice. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself, especially when it's hard, is the most powerful thing you can ever do.